Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Messianic Bible Study with me, Zelias Kanani. So, I recorded with my good friend Daniel a somewhat of a debate-style study on Christmas. He brought forward some good points regarding the quote-unquote pagan origins of Christmas. He's definitely against celebrating it, while I am for it, and it was a lot of fun. But as it stands, I remain unconvinced, and I figured I don't want to get away from studying the Bible too much, so I'm going to do a double feature this time. So with that, let's get started. We are in Genesis 30. I'm going to stay far from the microphone so you don't hear me making weird mouth noises. Genesis 30. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children, or I shall die." Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld you from the fruit of the womb?" Then she said, "Here is my servant Bilhah. Go in to her, so that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her." So she gave him to her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went in to her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged me, and has also heard my voice and given me a son." Therefore she called his name Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again, and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and have prevailed." So she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son, and Leah said, "Good fortune has come," so she called his name Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, "Happy am I, for women have called me happy." So she called his name Asher. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went out and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" Rachel said, "Then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night, and God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, God has given me my wages, because I gave my servant to my husband." So she called his name Issachar. And Leah conceived again, and bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me, because I have borne him 6 sons." So she called his name Zebulun. Afterwards she bore a daughter, and called her name Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son, and said, "God has taken away my reproach." And she called his name Joseph, saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away, that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it." Jacob said to him, "You yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also?" He said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep, and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later, when you come to look into my wages with you. every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. Laban said, Good, let it be as you have said. But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in the charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. And Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees, and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places, where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth stripes, speckled and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs, and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart, and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly, and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Man, I'm thirsty. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about this. Of course, we've spoken before about the Babylonian law that if a woman does not conceive a child for her husband early enough, then she is supposed to give her maidservant to her husband. Now, the law would not apply in this instance, and the reason for that is because, well, Jacob had other sons from Leah. So Rachel had absolutely no necessity to actually give Jacob any of her maidservants, because Jacob was having sons already. He was producing a group of people that could work his fields. This was entirely out of Rachel's self-interest, where she wants to have her own children. And this is why, like, my general feeling of Rachel is that she was more of the sort of partier, wild type, a bit more worldly in that sort of idea. And so she talks to Jacob and says, "Give me children or I shall die." And of course, Jacob says, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Now, when Jacob says this, he's actually revealing a Jewish understanding of one of the roles of God. The idea is only God can open and close the womb. He has the keys to the womb. And what's interesting, this goes back to the sort of idea that Michael Heiser talks about the divine council coming together. What happens, and the way that this theory goes, is that with every action that happens in the world, it goes up to God, and he convenes his council. That's himself and angels or angelic beings or something along those lines. And he convenes this council to determine what is going to happen with this particular action. And it's actually really interesting, and I really like this idea. I actually ascribe to it, because what it does is it provides the basis for both the absolute sovereignty of God and the free will of man. That is, these actions go up to God, and then God says, okay, first of all, is this going to occur how this person thinks it's going to occur? So like if you get put on birth control or something along those lines, God says, okay, is this going to work because I want to open your womb, or I want to allow you to close it? Or if you're barren or something, and let's say you're trying for a child, and God's like, are you going to be allowed to bear this child? And that's sort of the idea of this worldview. Okay, I had to take a call. Where was I? So yeah, it basically it helps us to reconcile the whole idea of the sovereignty of God and the sovereignty of man. And it just makes a lot of sense to me. It makes sense not only because I like it, it philosophically feels good, but more than that, at least the way that Michael Heiser puts it, is it would be how these people would have been thinking, the authors of the Bible. And that actually is really important because like if we came up with this idea and then the authors of the Bible just entirely thought of it in like Platonic vernacular, it just wouldn't make sense. You would have to throw that out because with the way that we study the Bible today, being the historical critical method, we cannot accept a foreign or alien method of interpreting these events. I mean, we can, but like it's on shaky historical ground at that point, and I would not feel comfortable with that sort of dealing with scripture in that sort of way. So Rachel gives Bilhah to Jacob more because she wants children. And the idea here, so Rachel, when this child is born unto Bilhah, she says, what does she say? God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. Then she said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. So it demonstrates, like, biblically speaking, I'm not just referencing Babylonian custom now, but the Bible actually does indicate that these children belonged to Rachel, not to Bilhah. Bilhah was the maidservant of Rachel, so these children were Rachel's. And, of course, Leah does the same thing. She begins to give her maidservant to Jacob, and he has a couple children from her. And then we have this weird story about the mandrakes. I have only ever heard about these mandrakes as being some sort of like primitive medicine, but like spiritual, medicinal sort of stuff. Basically sorcery. So this is one of those things that, like, okay, naturopathic medicine, I'm all for. I like it. I grew up with a hippie as a parent, so like naturopathic medicine, if we can give our body the tools to heal ourselves, to do something along those lines, then great. Sorcery is different. There's not much indication in the Bible story here that sorcery was actually going on. We do have indication that Rachel was not really a strong believer in the Lord. She turned to Jacob and said, give me a son. She didn't turn to God. She now is turning to these mandrakes, which are sort of an herb that can help. They're supposed to help fertility. Now, there's no indication she's turning to foreign gods. She's turning to mandrakes, like just medicine. She's also not turning to the true God. There could be some sort of hint here of paganism, though, because most of the time when you would have these herbs, like you would grow them or you'd get them from your local witch doctor or whatever. But most of the time when you would get these herbs and you would use them, these had like not just physical significance. Almost everything in the ancient world had religious significance. Like, who provided these mandrakes is the question. And most likely Rachel would have thought of these mandrakes as being provided by some sort of foreign god. And we know that the people of Israel sorry, not the people of Israel, the people in Jacob's camp here were not monotheists in large part. We could assume that Jacob was a monotheist and Abraham and Isaac. In fact, it's widely assumed that that Abraham was the first monotheist in post history. That's not the right term, but in the historical era, like once we started getting writing. So Jacob, we could assume his primary inclination would be towards monotheism, but there is no indication that like Rachel or Leah are inclined towards monotheism. There is indication that Leah is. We heard about the way that she has treated the Lord in the previous chapter, where she talks about how the Lord has provided me a child, and this is Reuben. So she seems to be much more in step with that. Rachel doesn't seem to be as much. She never praises the Lord for her. Actually, no, she does. She says, where is it? God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son. So there is an intonation or indication that Rachel also believes properly, but she also steals the household gods of Laban, and she's just a bit more of a messy person, especially when it comes to these mandrakes. Okay. So Leah, she has stopped bearing children, so she's like, okay, what's wrong with me? There's indication here that she wanted to use these mandrakes for herself, so she is thinking, okay, how can I use these mandrakes in order to re-fertilize myself or something along those lines? Then Rachel says, okay, well, I've never had any children, so can I buy these from you? And so Leah hires her son's mandrakes. She hires Jacob for her son's mandrakes, which is funny, and it indicates that marital prostitution is not that bad. That's a joke. So she conceives and bears another child. See, Leah here is like primarily focused on God, and that's the big difference that I think I see. Like after Reuben, a lot of her children are named after, like, the specific reason is God has given me my wages, God has endowed me with a good endowment, etc., etc. While Rachel, it's more just the first son, and then the other ones after that are not really called after God. Well, and Joseph. Okay. And now I could be just completely misreading Rachel. It does seem to indicate that there are multiple times where she does, she says that it is God that has opened up her womb and all that. So maybe I'm misreading it. Anyway, let's move on. Jacob's prosperity. So this is also another one of those funny stories where there have been scientists who have tested this and discovered that if you take these species of plants, put them in water after you stripe them or cut them or do whatever, turns out, guess what, guys? That doesn't lead to these sheep actually breeding spotted and speckled. That's not where spots and speckles come from. What we do see here is actually really interesting demonstration of Mendelian genetics, though, because as soon as Jacob says this, they understand that, or Laban understands that the way that you get Jacob to serve you longer is to remove all of the spotted and speckled and black sheep. So they understand that spotted breeds spotted. White, like pure white sheep, breeds pure white sheep. And then even further, Jacob understands that weak breeds weak, strong breeds strong, etc. So, I mean, I don't think, and I don't think this is a type of sorcery either, because what we hear in the next chapter is Jacob says that it's the angel of the Lord that told him to do this. So it's not really that he is like performing any sort of primitive science, and it's not that he is performing any sorcery here. This is basically just like how the people of Israel walked around the walls of Jericho. That wouldn't happen again, because the only reason that it worked was because God told them to do it, and he made it happen. It's the same thing here. The only reason that this sort of thing worked, it's not replicable or repeatable. It only worked because God told Jacob to do it, and because God made it work. It's a miracle, in other words, and the stripes and everything on the bamboo and whatever, that was only the sign of Jacob's obedience. And that's all. That's all that it was. Okay, let's move on to the next chapter, because there's not much else from that chapter that I can see, at least. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all his wealth. Actually, that's one more thing I want to say. Jacob says that Laban had nothing before Jacob came, and then because of Jacob's hard work, Laban had produced a lot of wealth. That's one of those principles in life that is true throughout all systems of economics. Hard work begets wealth. Theft does not beget wealth. It just doesn't. People who are lazy, even though they may be property owners, even though they may be slavers, even though they may be landlords or whatever, or lords, if they are lazy, they're probably not going to prosper all that much. Unless they have like really hardworking servants, and unless they promote their hardworking servants. And then hardworking lords or landlords or whatever, they are the ones that produce wealth. And if you are a slave, like Jacob here, he was essentially a serf. If you are a serf and you work hard and then like leave, make your way away from that situation, then you'll also prosper. This is one of those things that, like people argue all the time about economics and stuff, and how you get rich, and there's this whole idea about the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and all that sort of stuff. No, that's not really how it works. Of course, that is to say that it is definitely more complicated than that, but than what I put forward. But the rich, if they steal, if they get their wealth through unrighteous means, they are less likely to actually maintain their wealth. If they're lazy, very unlikely to maintain their wealth. If they are unintelligent, they're dumb, they waste all their money, all that sort of stuff, very unlikely to maintain their wealth. And if you are poor and you work hard, you're a go-getter, you're all that sort of stuff, then you're likely to be able to gain wealth. And of course, there are exceptions to this, but I think a lot of the, let's say, left side of economics, more Marxist economics, they like to focus on the exceptions and not the rule. And there are exceptions, that's for sure, but the exceptions are not the rule. And the way that economics works in almost every single system is that those who work hard produce the wealth. Those that are intelligent and wise, they produce the wealth. And those that don't, they're lazy, they're worthless, all that sort of stuff, they don't produce the wealth. And they squander their wealth, actually. So here in America, for instance, the statistics go that you can basically, if you're lucky, you can go from zero to like a millionaire in your lifetime here in America. If you're unlucky, it might take 2 or 3 generations. You can go from zero to middle class in your lifetime. Like pretty much anyone can do that here in America. And then, this is again if you're unlucky, then your children, if they're unlucky, but they work hard and they're intelligent, can go from middle class to wealthy. Or at least maintain middle class. And then the big important thing here is that if you're wealthy and you pass on your wealth to your children and they do the same thing to their children and to their children, in the vast majority of cases, that lasts 2 or 3 generations before they pass it along to one child, or maybe their children are just lazy. They do not know how to maintain wealth. They don't know what it means to work for their wealth. They just know that they have it, and they take it for granted, and they lose it all. That is the statistical reality of living in America. And so I don't like hearing the whiners talking about how they have it rough in America when we're in like the most prosperous nation in the history of the world. You go to King Henry VIII, you would hate living his life. You go compare the King Henry VIII to some illegal immigrant in the ghetto of LA or Chicago. You have a more stable life and more prosperous life in the ghetto of Chicago than you would have had if you were King Henry VIII. That's just a fact. Anyway, now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all his wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted, and if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift up your eyes and see, all the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban, the Aramean, by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. When it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsmen with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. And Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What have you done, that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me, and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. And now you have gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Jacob answered and said to Laban, Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live in the presence of our kinsmen. Point out what I have that is yours, and take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the 2 female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. So he searched, but did not find the household gods. Then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, What is my offense? What is my sin, that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us 2. These 20 years have I been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, The daughters here are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters, or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar, and Jacob said to his kinsmen, Gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, This heap is a witness between you and me today. Therefore he named it Gilead, and Mizpah, for he said, The Lord watch between you and me, when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. Then Laban said to Jacob, See this heap and the pillar which I have set before you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. And Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. Oh, my eyes hurt. Okay. Really interesting. I like this chapter here, though I won't have a whole lot of time to talk about it. So Jacob here, I mean this demonstrates what I was talking about just now regarding economics. What happens here is Laban, he is basically living off of the not ingenuity, the hard work of Jacob. And like Laban, he's like, okay, I want all of the white goats and sheep. Okay, so he takes all of his sheep, and then Jacob, all he gets are the next the children of these sheep that are spotted and speckled. And it turns out that all of them are spotted and speckled. Okay, so then he says, okay, only spotted ones you get to keep. And Jacob says, okay. So all the striped ones go, and then go to Laban. But then all the striped ones, they bear only the spotted ones. So then Laban says, okay, only striped ones you get to keep. So all the spotted ones go, and then all of the sheep, they only bear striped ones, or whatever. That seems to be what is going on here. The idea, though, is that Laban gets all of this wealth. He could hire someone else to take care of these sheep. He could do something to maintain his own wealth. Like, these are his sheep. But he doesn't. Jacob has to keep starting over with the new sheep, the new batches of sheep, and then Laban keeps them, but then he consumes them all. He doesn't maintain his wealth. Jacob, on the other hand, is the maintainer of Laban's wealth, and that's why Laban wants to keep him. And that's a demonstration that even Laban, who has had many opportunities in his life to gain wealth, does not know how to maintain it because he's lazy, and he is greedy, and he just doesn't do the things that you need to do. Jacob, on the other hand, does. Okay. So then we talk about Jacob, how he gets this vision from God. And this is actually really interesting. Where was it? Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said to him, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see all the goats that mate, and etc., etc. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. So this angel of the Lord is the God of Bethel. And, of course, the word God here is Elohim, and that could actually mean multiple things. It basically means divine being, and sometimes it does refer to just angels. So this might be the case here. In fact, this might be Michael the archangel, the archangel, being the true sort of designated defender of Jerusalem, of Israel. It might be the case that this is Michael or something. I don't think so, because he says here, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now, Jacob didn't make a vow to an angel. He made a vow to God, like the true God. So this angel here, appearing to Jacob, is not an angel. It's not merely a messenger or an angelic being. It is actually God. And so I want to make that point pretty clear. This happens a variety of times in the Old Testament, and this is one of those things that I think my Jewish brothers, they like to ignore. God appears to people in dreams as an angel of light, etc., and even in the form of men. And I think my Jewish brothers don't want to accept that or acknowledge that oftentimes, because it gets a little too Christian. Although it's interesting, because I don't think that is actually an explicitly Christian thing. Like, God can appear in the form of a man, or he can appear to have flesh or something along those lines without actually being in the flesh. So I don't understand why these sorts of verses get pushed back, but I think it's just because it's like, you're getting a little too close to the line there, buddy. Okay. So then, of course, Rachel and Leah, they're like, okay, let's leave. Which tells you something about how Laban viewed his daughters. He pretty much viewed them as property. And so Jacob put all his sons and his wives on camels, and then they drove away. Now, Laban, it took him 3 days to figure out that Jacob was missing. That says something. He was self-absorbed, and just this whole story makes that point, is he was self-absorbed. Of course, we have Rachel stealing her father's idols. Okay, so Laban finally overtakes Jacob, and he comes up to Jacob and he says, "What have you done that you have tricked me, etc., and taken my daughters captive and all that?" And he says, "I would have sent you away with mirth and songs and tambourines and lyre." Maybe, but Jacob had his reasons for thinking that you wouldn't. "So why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? And now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.'" And then he says, finally at the end, "But why did you steal my gods?" Now, some commentators, they think that this is like the crux of the issue, which maybe. I think the biggest thing for Laban here is the wealth. And the gods might be the gods of wealth that like he might actually be dealing with, like the gods of the harvest or the gods of the shepherd god Tammuz or something along those lines. But I don't think that is the primary issue. I think his primary issue is wealth, in all honesty. So Jacob says, "I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force." And then he says, "Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours and take it." Now the Bible here says, "Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them." Now, most of the time when I hear about this story, the commentator will make the point that this is the point where sort of Jacob sealed Rachel's fate. The interesting thing here is Laban only looks in the tents of Jacob, Leah, Rachel, and Bilhah and Zilpah. He does. I mean, maybe he looked at other people's tents or whatever, but the Bible doesn't say that he does. So Laban, understanding when Jacob says, "They shall not live," Laban is fully expecting that one of these people as his gods, they're either my daughters, or they're the slaves of my daughters, or they're Jacob, my son-in-law. One of them is going to die. He doesn't care. Like, I just find that so perplexing. But it's because he serves money. That's his thing. He doesn't care about his daughters. And that's why this explains everything about his character. He doesn't care. He doesn't even care about his daughters to defend them from death. They were property to him. Okay, so Rachel is the one that sits on, who hides the household gods, and then Jacob becomes angry with Laban and sort of just goes off on him. Jacob seems like the type of guy who doesn't really go off on people. He's not very assertive, but it's been boiling under the lid of the pot here for a while, so the lid's about to flip, and that's exactly what happens. Jacob flips his lid and just goes off on Laban. Now, this is another interesting thing. These judges who were between Laban and Jacob, they're both of their kinsmen. This actually was a common occurrence throughout the ancient world where I did some studies on Jewish marriage rights and stuff, for instance. And in the first century, at the very least, the Jewish wedding, when the guy and the girl would finally consummate their marriage, you would have a party from the father and the party from the groom both of them trying or getting the evidence or the lack of evidence for the bride's purity. And I mean, there are a variety of reasons for this, but like one of the specific reasons was because in the law at the time, if the bride was impure, then the groom actually could divorce the bride without giving her any sort of money in return, in return of the divorce. A lot of people think that she was just stoned to death. That wasn't the case. In those days, you could choose to stone or choose to divorce or choose to get a lamb slaughtered or a bull slaughtered in replacement for the adultery. But if she was not a virgin, then he would have reason to divorce her, and he would be able to do that without paying her bride price. So the father and both the groom give her money, and that's hers, but it's able to be utilized by the groom. So if they divorce, and she is at fault there, all of that money goes to him. So there's a little bit riding on, there's a little bit of incentive for him to divorce her and to not find the blood or the evidence of her virginity. Now, inversely, there's obviously reason for the father. I mean, he loves his daughter. He doesn't want her to be put to shame. First of all, it would put her to shame. It would put him to shame. Second of all, it would be possibly her death, and he would lose out on money as well. If he divorces her and he is at fault, then she gets to take that money back with the father. And so, like, there's incentive on both sides, and so both of them hire a party to, or they don't hire, but they have like their own witnesses that would, in the first century, go into the bridal chamber after they consummate and leave, and they will gather the evidence for just in case there's ever litigation in the future. That seems to be what's going on here, except it's, of course, not for a marriage, but you have both of them are bringing witnesses saying, what is the wrong that was done? Why have you pursued me hotly? All that sort of stuff. And let's find a judgment for this. Let's litigate this. And that's what these witnesses are for. And so then Jacob, he presents his case. And of course, the witnesses, he's presenting his case. All the witnesses agree that this is basically what happened. Then Laban answers and he says, all of this is mine, and that sort of thing. And of course, the witnesses don't really say much to that either. So what they do is they say, okay, let's cut our losses, split up from here, and we'll be done. And Jacob says, Laban says, let's make a covenant, you and I. And let the covenant be a witness between you and me. Now, this is another thing that was really interesting in the ancient world, what they would do. And we all know about like stela, I think is the right way to pronounce it, which are commemorative pillars. The only purpose that they serve is that they're in a place and you pass by it and you read it. This was common in the ancient world. Of course, they weren't all written on, but you would have boundary markers for your property. You would set 4 pillars, and then you would be able to like measure, okay, this is my property or something along those lines. We found plenty of these, by the way, from ancient times. You would have national boundary markers established by these pillars or witnessed by these pillars. Solomon set up 2 pillars on either side of what he thought was the place of the crossing of the Red Sea. And they say this is a pillar from Solomon, this is where the Red Sea crossing happened and all that sort of stuff. And so these commemorative pillars are just like everywhere. And they were also particularly evidences or witnesses to covenants. And the idea here is that this pillar is not just a pillar, and they make mention of it here. Jacob, for instance, he sets up the pillar as an altar, and pours oil on it when he sees Jacob's ladder. The idea is that these are commemorating not just a fact that happened, but these are beacons, so to speak, of divine presence. You set up this pillar, and it's a demonstration that God is there. He has seen this thing happen, and whatever gods you swear by, they're the ones that will defend the agreement that this pillar represents. And that's the idea. And this you can read more about that in The Unseen World by Michael Heiser, because he goes into that specifically in detail. But what they do is, in verse 43, Jacob says, gather stones, and they all take stones, and they made a heap, and they ate there by the heap, and they name it, and then they say, this heap is a witness between you and me today, therefore they named it Gilead and Mizpah, and he said, the Lord watch between you and me, when we are out of one another's sight, etc. So, God is witness between you and me, and then Jacob says, this heap and the pillar which I have set between you and me, this heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So they're evoking these different gods to sort of cover all the bases. Like, the God you fear is witness here, so you better not pass by, and the God I fear is witness here, so I'm not going to pass by this pillar and all that. And that's just one of those really interesting ways that they kept track of agreements, is these mounds or pillars that were witness to certain events. This was this was ubiquitous in ancient Mesopotamia, the ancient Near East, but it existed all the way down to ancient Rome. They have, of course, the famous Roman arches commemorating certain victories, but more than that, you have Josephus. He writes about plenty of these pillars. He actually writes about pre-flood pillars that commemorate the great flood of the world. But he also talks about Lot's wife being still a pillar of salt in wherever he thought that Sodom and Gomorrah was, which indicates that Lot's wife was seen by ancient Jews as, and the pillar that she formed after becoming a pillar of salt, she was seen as a witness to the events there. That pillar was enough for anybody to pass by and be like, this is what God did here. Now, oftentimes these pillars had written on them the specific thing that they're witnessing to, but oftentimes they didn't, and it was more an oral tradition that was continued to pass down. Or they wrote in their local judicial books or something. Now, this is interesting. Now, of course, I've talked about polygamy, I think, on this podcast, but it's one of those that, it's hard to prove that the Bible speaks against it. There are a couple contingent instances, but this is interesting. Laban, he says, the Lord watched between you and me when we were out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives beside my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. The idea of taking a wife besides the wife that you already have is likened to oppression. And that's just interesting. I find it really interesting. Later we get, I think it's Micah 2, talks about how these men have acted wickedly to the wives of their youth by taking other wives or by divorcing or something along those lines. And it demonstrates here and there, and then you get the New Testament where Paul says, I think in Timothy, let a man be married to one wife. There was indication in those days that it was not good to be polygamous. It was a form of oppression. You couldn't multiply wives willy-nilly. And in the New Testament, you can't be married to multiple women if you wanted to be a leader in the church. Now, the Bible, I don't think there's ever a clear prescriptive, thou shalt not have multiple wives, but I think it's clear that the Bible doesn't like it. God doesn't like polygamy. There is an issue if you are in those days and you can't have children by one wife. You have to have another wife in order to produce children. But that's because there's this thing in the ancient, in the Bible, children were really important. Now, we don't understand that today, how important children were. They were the lifeblood of a society. If you couldn't have children, you were dead. When Rachel says, give me children or I will die, she's, being a little dramatic, but she's not being totally hyperbolic there. If she doesn't have children, she's not gonna, she's not part of the lifeblood of the community. It was, there was an intense sense of shame that involved being barren. Children were important for a variety of reasons. They produced the lineage and the continuation of the lineage of the father. They and the mother. They took care of the father and the mother when they were older. They allowed them to multiply exceedingly without buying slaves or anything. They just were really important. And the reason that polygamy is not spoken explicitly against, and the reason that it is a form of oppression, a form of wrong, but it's not like a higher form of wrong, is because there are instances where it's necessary. Now, there's no instance in the modern Western world where it would be necessary. The only instances here is if you need children. If your current wife cannot produce children, that's the only reason. But it's also interesting that there is a form of polygamy that's looked down upon and a form that's not looked down upon. Laban gives his 2 daughters to Jacob. He knows that Jacob will take care of them or whatever, and he doesn't see this as oppression. But of course, Laban's not the best marker of oppression of women. But this is because it's all part of the same family. He sees this as all one group. And Jacob takes Bilhah and Zilpah. But that's also not seen as oppression, because his 2 wives give these other 2 women to him in order to have children. So what is a form of oppressive polygamy in those days was when you sort of just, I'm trying to remember the word, but you took wives that were entirely unnecessary. Oh, there's another beautiful woman. I have money. I have enough money. I'm going to go take her. There are a couple problems with this, and we see this a bit in Jacob's life too. It makes a woman feel bad, 1. And 2, it divides the estate. Now, Jacob's estate, if let's say he has 1 wife and she has 5 sons, his estate goes to all 5 of his sons. A double portion goes to the firstborn, but all of that estate goes to make sure that his wife is sustained in her old age. If he has 2 wives, that is divided in half. 3, again, it's divided. And so it's a form of not just emotional oppression, but economic oppression. It's just wrong. If they're sisters, then that's a bit of a different story, because you are going to divide the estate between 2 women, but they're essentially part of the same family, and so it's not like they're going to oppress each other, theoretically or hypothetically. But this is interesting just because I think that it's one of the intimations in the Bible that really makes clear that polygamy is actually, if it's done in an unnecessary way, if it's done superfluously, it is just flat out wrong. It's flat out oppression. And we should not oppress our women. I want to continue on that line of reasoning, but I should get going. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know in the comment section below, and have a good day. Bye.